So we are in chapter 4 of the Managerial Accounting book. Excuse me. But honey, I tried calling you. I'm in class. I'll call you back. Bye. This week, we are going to learn about a new method of costing that's called process costing. Now, this is for specific kinds of products that are huge in bulk. So we'll talk about the benefits, the similarities, the differences, but this is for a different type of manufacturing process. So we've talked about job order costing for 2 weeks. And in both processes, we still assign the materials, the labor, and the overhead to products. Both systems are going to use the same accounts that we're familiar with: manufacturing overhead, raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. And we flow those costs similarly, but here's where the difference is. In this new costing method we're going to talk about, here it's when a single product is continually produced on a continual basis or over a long period of time, and they're identical products, like milk, like gasoline, oil. The costs in each department are accumulated. And the unit costs, however they base a unit on, are computed also by each department. Now, in job order costing, they're working on a lot of different jobs during the same period, and the costs get accumulated by individual job. But in this case, the costs are going to be accumulated by department. Okay? So when we look at here, let's do our little first question. Process costing is used for products that are similar and that are produced continuously. When you've got a unit in an organization where you've got materials, labor, and overhead added to the product, that is how we handle process costing. The activities performed in one of these departments get performed the same way on all units of production. So the output of a processing department is homogeneous. It's the same. Products in a process costing environment flow from one department to another department to another department as they're refined or improved or whatever that process is. So again, this is process costing for this week. First thing we're going to do is talk about how we're going to record the flow of materials through this system. Again, we've got direct materials and labor and factory overhead, direct materials, direct labor, and factory manufacturing overhead that flow into the work in process as the product is being manufactured. It flows into work in process until the product is completed, which then it moves out of work in process and flows into finished goods. When it is sold, it is removed from the inventory finished goods into cost of goods sold. Now, under job order costing systems, we flow all these direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead into specific jobs. those get applied directly to the job. But under the process system, we're going to trace these direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead to each department. Okay? Because it's one huge product that continues forever and ever. The costs are going to flow to department because the job is the same continuously. For purposes of what we're going to look at, we're going to just assume right now there are two processing departments, Department A and Department B. So when milk comes in or oil comes in, it starts in Department A. And when Department A is completed with their steps, it will then move to Department B. So what happens is the raw materials that flow directly into Department A are shown into that department as a debit. If there are raw materials that are transferred immediately into only Department B, then that is where they will be debited to. In job order costing, materials are drawn from the storeroom using a material requisition form. In process costing, it's the same way. Materials are used via a requisition form, and they can be added to any processing department. If, in an example, a company is making a product, they require materials, it will show the materials that went into work in process Department A, work in process Department B, and it will credit those raw materials. It goes out of one inventory account called raw materials, and it goes into another inventory account called work in process with the departments. So you see, it's coming out of raw materials, going into the various departments. What am I doing wrong? Let me just see here. Okay, sorry about that. I went backwards. The same thing happens with labor, wages. Where the labor is utilized, it's going to flow directly to that department. So you see, same thing. Instead of showing which job A or job B as we would in job order costing, here we're showing work in process Department A, work in process Department B, and crediting our salaries payable. Also, the same applies to manufacturing overhead. We're going to apply this manufacturing overhead to the various departments. Again, the journal entry. We debit our work in process with departments, and we credit our manufacturing overhead that's being applied. When the products have been completed in one department, and then they're going to be moved or transferred into the next department, we will just show in the various sub-accounts a credit from the department they're leaving and a debit to the department they are being transferred. The transferred in cost from Department A are added to the manufacturing costs that are incurred. in Department B. So they just keep accumulating. Makes sense. Very logical. When, in this case, there are just 2 departments for processing. When the goods are completed in Department B, all the costs that have been assigned there get transferred out of Department B as a credit and go into another inventory account called finished goods. Okay, here's the journal entry. Then, when those finished goods are sold, it is at that time they are no longer in inventory. They have now been transferred to a cost of goods sold in the income statement account. So they get credited out of our finished goods, and they are now expensed in the income statement under cost of goods sold. Again, here's the journal entry to show that step. In process costing, each department has to calculate 2 items for reporting purposes. The cost of its ending work in process inventory, along with the cost of its completed units that were transferred to the next stage of the production process. The key to deriving these 2 numbers is calculating the unit cost within each department. Now, in calculating these unit costs, we can use 2 different methods. We can use the weighted average method, or we could use the FIFO method. Under the weighted average method, it makes no distinction between work done in the prior and current periods, and it blends together units and costs from not just the current period, but also the prior period. So then once it does that, the equivalent units of production for a department are then the number of units transferred to the next department, plus any equivalent units in that department's ending work in process. So what's been transferred, what's still on hand, get computed into equivalent units. There are also conversion costs. The direct labor costs, when we're dealing with process costing, generally are going to be a minute piece of the big cost. Okay. So they get put into conversion costs. They get added to that manufacturing overhead also because it is such a small figure. They just add it to a piece of the conversion cost. Equivalent units is defined as the product, the number of partially completed units and the percentage completion of those units. Equivalent units need to be calculated because a department usually has some partially completed units in its beginning and its ending inventory. These partially completed units make it more challenging in figuring out what the department really put out for a certain period. So that's why we're going to take these unit costs to be assigned to those equivalent units. So no, equivalent units is going to equal the number of partially completed units times the percent of them that are completed to come up with a pro rata figure. The equivalent units is the number of complete units that could have been obtained from the materials and effort that went into the partially completed units. So as you see here, Department A has 500 units in its ending work in process. They're 60% complete with respect to processing in that particular department. So the 500 units at 60% complete has equivalent units of 300. So guys, I want all of you to come in here and attempt this. For the current period, Jones started 15,000 units and completed 10,000 of those units. It left 5,000 units in process at 30% complete. How many equivalent units of production did Jones have for the period? I want all you guys to attempt to answer it. Okay? Oops, you can't see if I put it there.
Like in the chat or verbally?
I'm sorry, what?
Like, do you want us to like just type in the chat or just answer it verbally?
Exactly. You can say it or you can put it in the chat box. Either way.
Oh, I'd say B.
What anyone else say B? Does anyone?
Yeah, I got B.
Good. Who else?
I did too.
3 of you guys. There's 7 of you all here. So who else?
I also got B.
Got it. Anyone else? Okay, I'll ask for the others in a little bit. Okay, so you are absolutely correct, guys. So B is the right answer. Let's take an exercise and let's look at this. Chocolatier, hey, process costing. What will happen in this class is you'll just start looking at other things and going, oh, I know what kind of costing or manufacturing they do. Chocolatier is located in a French-speaking canton in Switzerland. The company makes chocolate truffles that are sold in popular embossed tins. The company has 2 processing departments, cooking and molding. In the cooking department, the raw ingredients for the truffles are mixed and then cooked in special candy-making vats. In the molding department, the melted chocolate and other ingredients from the cooking department are carefully poured into molds and decorative flourishes are applied by hand. After cooling, the truffles are packed for sale. The company uses a process costing system. The T accounts on the next slide show the flow of cost through the 2 departments in April. So as you see here, work in process cooking, work in process for molding. For the cooking, they started the year with $8,000 worth. They added the materials, direct labor, and the overhead. And then that cooking was 160,000 of it was transferred out and transferred into the molding department. The molding department had a beginning balance, along with it had some additional direct labor and overhead. Then that molding department completed units transferred out is 240,000. Okay. Prepare journal entries showing the flow of costs through the 2 processing departments during April. I'm going to give you guys an attempt to try these. And what I would like you guys to do is, how about, let me see how we've broken down this class here today. So we've got Alexander, Connor, and Drew. How about you guys kind of try to work on the first department? You know, see if you guys get it right. And then Victoria, Kayla, I don't want to mess up your name. Gano, Ms. Vang.
Gal is fine.
Gal, I'm sorry. And then Callie. Have I missed anyone? I want you guys to attempt to work on the molding department, and let's bring it all together. In other words, what I'm trying to have you guys do is let's work while we're talking here, okay? So I'm going to call on all of you, okay? You can pass, but I want to call. So give yourselves a couple minutes and try to see what the journal entry will be. Okay. Guys, you ready?
I guess so.
Okay. Why don't one of you start?
Okay, so
I
for
can
the
share my screen if you want, or we can just talk. Okay, we'll just talk.
for the for the first one, I guess I'd get I'd call it work in process cooking, I guess.
Yeah.
And then so for the materials, I do like 42,000, and then I'd credit the materials inventory thingy 42,000.
Yep. Yep.
And then, like, am I gonna hand this off to someone, or am I gonna do like all of them for that?
Hand it off. Who else is ready?
Anybody?
Is anyone else here?
I'm here. I'm still
Good.
trying to figure it out.
Okay, that's okay. I just want to know you're here. Thank you. Any other guys here listening?
I am.
Who's I am?
Kayla.
Kayla. I'm sorry. Any other men that were going to handle part one in the room? Anyone else? Okay. Here's the intent. If you're going to show up, be here. Okay. I'm not going to kick anyone out this time, but you don't get the benefit of going through the exercises and stuff if you can't stay. Just saying. So what you said is exactly correct. We're going to debit our work in process for cooking, and we're going to credit out the raw material inventory because that's coming out of the raw materials. It's going into that department cooking. The next thing we'll do is, let's just kind of take cooking right now. We're going to put in the labor for work in process cooking, and it will come directly from salaries and wages payable. The manufacturing overhead will have the same. We'll debit our work in process cooking, and we'll credit the manufacturing overhead. That goes straight into that cooking. Perfect. Now I'm breaking them down by department because that's how it works for me. I look at one department, kind of figure it out. Look at the next department, figure it out. Now, guys, it looks like the raw materials only happened in cooking. Molding did not get any new raw materials in. So you see, for molding, the salary and wages payable that were applicable to the molding department went in there. The work in process for molding, the manufacturing overhead that was applied to the molding department went in there. When the items were taken out of cooking and were transferred to the molding department, you see here, we have a debit to work in process molding, a credit to work in process cooking to show they were taken out of cooking, which is why they were credited, transferred into molding. You also see when the products were completed in the work in process molding department, they were taken out of there and transferred into finished goods. Anyone have any questions on this? Is it making sense?
Yep.
It's making a lot more sense now. Yes.
Good. What my goal is, I will be successful if I try to make it simple, break it down, take it piece by piece, so it just makes sense to you. Now, using the weighted average method, we'll compute the equivalent units. The weighted average method, remember, takes everything and doesn't assume any prices are different. We take the beginning, the ending, and what's been put in and come up with an average all around. Smith Company reported the following activity in the assembly department for the month of June. So it tells us at the beginning of June, the balance sitting in there were 300 units. And for just the materials, they were 40% completed. And for conversion, they were 20% completed. And then it tells us what went into production during the month, what got transferred out during the month. And then at the end of the month, exactly how many units were sitting there with a percent of completion for both materials and conversion. Okay, so what we need to do is come up with equivalent units. We know 54 units were transferred out. Okay, the whole 100% of 54 units were transferred out. As of the end of the month, we had 900 units completed, 60% in regards to materials, 30% in regards to conversion. That's what we produced during the month of June. Okay. So equivalent units of production will always equal the units completed and transferred plus the units remaining in work in process. So you see what we did here was we took what was totally transferred out because that's 100% done. And then at the end of the month, the equivalent units sitting in work in process at the end of the period. And then we come up with the equivalent units of production that happened in the department during June. Okay. So you see here, let me just shut this so I can. You see here with materials, we started 6,000 units during the month. Okay, that's what was started. The units completed are going to be the 5,400 units that were completed plus 540 equivalent units gives us our equivalent units of production of 5,940. So we're taking that by our beginning work in process of 300 units plus the 5,100 units we started gives us our 5,400. The end of the period, we had 900 units, 60% complete is 540 equivalent units. Therefore, units of production for this department, 5,940. Conversion, so let's just go back here to make sure. This was for material purposes only. For conversion costs, we started with 300 units, but they were 20% complete for conversion purposes. Okay. Excuse me, I didn't mean that. 5,100 units, plus we brought in 300 units for the period. So we're going to take those whole entire units of 5,400 units. Because what started at the beginning of the month all went in full. But at the end of the month, we had 900 units, 30% complete, which is 270 units. So we take the 5,400, add our ending work in process to give us our equivalent units of production of 5,670. So if we look at this question here, Highland's company uses the weighted average method in its process costing. It processes wood pulp for various manufacturers of paper products. Data relating to tons of pulp processed during June are shown below. So it shows us our work in process for June 1st, the percentages complete. It shows us our ending work in process for June 30th and what was started during the year. So we're going to complete the tons of pulp completed and transferred out in June. And then we're going to compute equivalent units of production for the materials and for the labor and overhead in June. So first, number of tons of pulp completed and transferred out. We started with 20,000. You see that? Started with 20,000. We added to it 190, which gives us total tons of 210,000. But still sitting in work in process at the end of June was 30,000, with 30,000 tons. Therefore, what was completed and transferred out during the month is 180,000 tons. You take the beginning work in process, you add what was started during the period, then you subtract the ending work in process to come up with what was transferred out. Now, as it relates to equivalent units of production, we're going to show what was transferred out. Then we're going to show our ending work in process. If it tells us there were 30,000 tons sitting there, but in regards to materials, they were 60% complete, then that means 18,000 equivalent units of production in regards to materials. For labor and overhead, it was 40% complete, so that would be 192,000 equivalent units of production. Now we'll compute the cost per equivalent unit using the weighted average method. So far we've come up with the number of units. Now we're going to put a dollar amount to it. So if beginning work in process had 300 units and they give us the materials was 40% complete, the conversions 20% complete, and it gives us a dollar value. It gives us what was started during June and what was completed during June. So we add our material costs and our conversion costs in June. And then we know what's still on hand in work in process at the end of June. Make sense?
Yes.
Good, thank you. So, to compute the cost per equivalent unit, we're going to take the cost of beginning work in process plus the cost added during the period, to come dividing that by our equivalent units of production to come up with a cost per equivalent unit. So we can compute this in dollar form. So as of June 1st, we have material cost percentage complete of 6,119, conversion costs of 3,920. We add to that the costs added during the period, gives us our total cost. If we know our equivalent units, we can then come up with a dollar amount per equivalent unit in the materials department and in the conversion department. So Superior Microproducts uses a weighted average method in its process costing. We see here work in process at the beginning of the month, cost added during May, and the equivalent units of production. I want you now to take a minute and I want you to attempt to compute the cost per equivalent unit. Okay? I'll give you 5 minutes, and then if someone feels somewhat confident to talk, that'd be great. Give you a couple minutes.
I think I found them.
Awesome. Anyone else need some time, or are we good?
I think I got them too.
Okay, good. So who wants to help?
I got it too.
Okay, guys, it sounds like it's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we take the cost at the beginning, add the cost added, you've got the total. If you divide that by the units of production, you've got a cost. Okay. If you add them all together, we should come up with total cost per equivalent unit of $22.94. Sound good?
Yeah, that's what I got.
Good. Now, next, we're going to assign cost to the units using this method. So we've got the assembly department. We've got equivalent units, materials of 540, conversion of 270. And we've got our cost per equivalent unit. And then we've got our cost in dollar form. So we've got 540 units of materials at 21 bucks. We've got 270 equivalent units at 15 bucks to give us a total of $15,390. The amount that was transferred, completed and transferred out, 5,400 units of materials at 21 bucks. The conversion, 5,400 at 15 bucks, shows what was transferred out. Data concerning a recent period's activity in the prep department, which is the first processing department, shows equivalent units in ending work in process and the cost per equivalent unit. Then it also says a total of 20,100 units were completed and transferred to the next processing department. So our job is to compute the cost of ending work in process for materials, conversion, and in total, and then the cost of the units that were completed and transferred out. Okay. So we know ending work in process, 2,000 at $13.86 per unit gives us the 27,720. Conversion, we do it the same way. And the way we know what was transferred out, we're going to take those same cost per equivalent unit to determine the units transferred out to the next department. So in ending work in process, there's 31,264 sitting. The amount costs that were transferred out to the next department is 367,629. So once we do all that, we'll prepare a cost reconciliation report. We show the beginning work in process for a department, and we show the costs that were added. And with those costs, we break it down what's left in ending inventory and what's been transferred to the next department. Pretty straightforward. Now, we're dealing with process costing. They're talking about something called operation costing here, where it's got a little bit of both. Operation costing is kind of a combination between the job order and process costing. Now, again, in this, we show they just want a cost reconciliation report that we just looked at. So it tells us the baking department, the cost of work in process at the beginning was $3,570. The cost of ending work in process was $2,860. And the cost added to production was $43,120. In order to prepare a cost reconciliation, we start with beginning work in process. We add what's been transferred in or added in. And then that total, the total to be accounted for, is going to be broken down by ending work in process and then the work in process that's been completed and transferred out. Okay. So you see again, we start the beginning work in process, and what's been added has to equal the ending, and the plug-in is going to be the cost of units completed and transferred out. So as long as you know everything else, you're going to be able to figure that out. Scribner's Corporation produces fine papers in 3 production departments: pulping, drying, and finishing. In the pulping department, raw materials like wood fiber and rag cotton are mechanically and chemically treated to separate their fibers. The result's a thick slurry of fibers. In the drying department, those fibers transferred from that pulping department, the department A to department B, are laid down on porous webs, pressed to remove excess liquid, and they're dried in ovens. Then in the finishing department, the dried papers coated, cut, and cooled onto reels. The company uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. So we see the number of units that were started, and then we know those units that started, what percent were complete in regards with pulping, what percent is complete in regards to conversion. We know the ending inventory and work in process, the units in regards to pulping and conversion. Then we're given the pulping cost in work in process at the beginning, along with the conversion, the units transferred to the next department, the pulping cost added during March, and the conversion cost added during March. So in that, well, I'll just keep going. No materials are added in the drying department. Pulping costs represent the cost of the wet fibers transferred in from the pulping department. Wet fiber is processed in the drying department in batches. Each unit in the above table is a batch, and one batch of wet fibers produces a set of dried paper that's passed on to the finishing department. So we're going to compute the drying department's equivalent units for pulping and conversion in March. Then we're going to compute the cost per equivalent unit. We'll compute the ending work in process costs and what was transferred out to the finishing department. And then from there, a cost reconciliation. Here's the deal, guys. It sounds like a lot, but no, it's simple. You break it one at a time. Just keep it simple. So if we've got pulping and conversion. It tells us we had 157,000 units. Just make sure where I saw it. 157,000 units completed. It also showed us at the beginning of the period, at the end of the period. At the end of the period, what's sitting with pulping, what's sitting in relation to conversion with percentages complete. That's the equivalent units of production. The cost per equivalent unit is going to be the beginning work in process plus the cost added during the period. Divide that by the equivalent in units of production. For pulping, it's 65 cents per unit. For conversion, it's 20 cents per unit. The ending work in process, along with the units transferred out, we know the ending units. They gave us the cost per equivalent unit. So we know the actual cost of ending inventory in relation to pulping, conversion, and then 5,600 total. And then the amount of units transferred out to the next department, we can now put a dollar figure on that. So how do we account for the products? Well, we started with 5,300 in work in process. We added to that cost of 133,750. And we account for those in work in process at the end of the month, 5,600, along with units completed and transferred out of 133,450. So for this week, you're going to have problems just like what we have gone through here. As you see here, same concept. Old Country Links Incorporated produces sausages in 3 production departments: mixing, casing, mixing, casing and curing, packaging. In the mixing department, meats are prepared and ground and then mixed with spices. The spiced meat mixtures then transferred to casing and curing, where it's force-fed into the casings and then hung and cured. Then it's transferred to the packaging department, where they're sorted, packed, and labeled. It gives us the beginning work in process, percent completed, and the ending. It also gives us the dollar amounts of the beginning work in process and the cost added. Okay, so basically, you're going to do the exact same thing we just did in one of our problems. Determine the casing and curing department's equivalent units of production. Compute the cost per equivalent units. Compute the cost of ending work in process. Compute what was transferred out and prepare a cost reconciliation. Identical, guys, to what we just did. Okay. Next. Come on, where is it?
Didn't you also say there's like an error with this one too?
No, not that I know of with this one. With the
okay.
last week it was. Okay. Next one. It's the same thing. You're just going to do a cost reconciliation. This is about preparing journal entries, similar to what we've done here. And then last, this one, what were the mixing department's equivalent units for materials and conversion for April? What were the mixing department's cost per equivalent units? They give you the detail. How many units were transferred out? And then explain this number 4. Is he bogus? Okay. Again, you have unlimited time to work on this. You can check your answers constantly, or, check to see if you're on the right path. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, text them, or post them in the discussion, or email me. It should be pretty straightforward. There's a lot of steps in this, but guys, write a sheet of paper so you know exactly the process to compute the equivalent units. Okay? Write out exactly how the reconciliation report should look and have it as a note so you're not confused. Can I help you with anything, guys? How are you doing?
I mean, the homework looked pretty straightforward.
Good. Well,
Yeah.
if it's not, you email me. Okay, guys?
All right.
Bless you guys. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the nice weather while we have it.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.